Please be advised, this episode may have content that some may find distressing. Listener discretion is advised, and this podcast is not suitable for anyone under the age of 13. Hello and welcome to episode 44 of It's Murder Up North. Today's case looks at the dangers of forming relationships online, in a world where we're becoming increasingly reliant on technology for communication. I would like to take this moment to refer you to an article written by a friend of mine on her website, Murder News, which goes into more details regarding online dating, and there are many other fascinating articles available. My podcast of the week is the Mask of Sanity podcast, hosted by Melanie. This show is so well researched and presented, I highly recommend giving it a listen. Here is a sneak peek.
Well, hey there, I'm Melanie Peterson, the host of Mask of Sanity. Buckle up, my friends, and come on a journey with me as I take you through the cases of some of the world's most notorious killers and root for the brave men and women who brought them to justice. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and hear all about the calculated madness of some of the world's most brutal killers who hid behind the Mask of Sanity. Don't forget to follow Mask of Sanity on all social media to stay up to date on each week's episode. Until next time, stay safe, friends.
Now, let's head to the episode. It's a cold, dark autumnal night, and the rain is drumming on the windows, the wind's howling, the trees shaking, casting grotesque shadows across the ground. But you are in your home, where the lights emit a soft, comforting glow, curled up on the sofa with a blanket wrapped around you, in a place where you feel safe. Relaxing in front of your favourite television show, all the worries and stress of the day just slip away as you melt into the cosy cushions with your drink of choice. Then your phone chimes, and your face lights up when you see it's a message from someone you just met. They make you laugh, they share the same interests as you, and you've been speaking to each other for hours, although it feels like you've known one another for years. The message reads, "Let's meet in real life." Your heart beats a bit faster, and a blend of nerves and excitement swells inside. You knew that it was a possibility that one day you would meet beyond the keyboard of your computer. You hesitate. Your eyes fix upon their profile picture, and you smile. They are good looking, and you would love to get to know them better. So you reply with trepidation, "Okay, let's meet." But do you really know who the person on the other side of the screen is? Are they really the person in the picture? Whenever we meet someone online, there is always that risk, that uncertainty. But if we're honest, the risk we don't consider is our own safety. We worry about if we'll have the same chemistry as we have shared online, or whether the other person will actually turn up. More people than ever are finding love online, and it is estimated by 2030 approximately half of all relationships will start this way. I met my husband online. We've been together now for 11 years, so we could be considered one of the success stories. But there are also the horror stories, the darker side of the internet, where not everything is as it seems. And the problem is, as we sit in our homes, feeling safe and relaxed, we are more inclined to let our guard down. We become more trusting, and reveal information that we would not normally disclose, believing that the face on the screen is the person you are conversing with. For 17-year-old Ashleigh Hall, that face on the screen and the words on the page were from a 17-year-old boy called Peter Cartwright, whose photo was attractive and words were flattering. Ashleigh was born in January 1992. Her parents separated when she was young, and she was raised by her mother and grandparents. At the age of 7, she joined the Brownies, and Ashleigh exemplified the Brownie law, which states that, quote, "A Brownie guide thinks of others before herself and does a good turn every day." Andrea Hall described her daughter's nature, stating, quote, "Ashleigh was my rock. We were on our own for 11 years, because I had my 3 other daughters late. Because of that, she was also my friend as well as my daughter. She helped me constantly with the others. She babysat, ironed, changed nappies. She did everything I asked of her. She fed, washed and bathed them, because she had a loving nature. I would give her a little bit of pocket money for helping around the house, and she used every penny to top up her phone to chat to her friends. Ashleigh helped take care of her 3 younger sisters, and in essence, she took on the responsibility of a second parent. At school, she was described as someone who was eager to learn, who proved popular with teachers and pupils alike. This popularity earned her a large group of friends, to whom she was bubbly and filled with energy. Upon leaving school, Ashleigh attended Darlington College, where she chose to pursue her love of children by taking a course in childcare, with her ultimate ambition to be a childminder or nursery nurse. In September of 2009, she had just started her final year at college, as well as assisting her granddad with his gardening business to help earn some extra money. Her grandfather spoke of her fondly, quote, "She was so bubbly, lively and lovely. She was a bit of a chatterbox, always on the phone or the computer, or talking to someone in the street. She just wanted to be involved." Sunday, October the 25th, 2009, was just a normal day in the Hall household, but it would become a day etched in the mind of Andrea forever. Ashleigh's mother recalled her memories, the day that changed her life, quote, "It had been a pleasant day, with Ashleigh offering to make breakfast for everyone. She made sausage sandwiches, which was really nice, because that was the first time she'd made breakfast in ages. Sunday was a good day, and Ashleigh was in a great mood. On Sunday evening, she was on the computer, chatting to friends. At about 7:30, I think, she asked if she could sleep at a friend's house. It was a bit last minute, but I said, yes, okay, as long as you're home by 10:30 the next morning. She threw some clothes in a bag and went downstairs. I was upstairs putting the young ones to bed. Ashleigh opened the door and shouted, "See you tomorrow, Mum." I shouted to her to make sure she was home by 10:30. Andrea continued. The following day, when she wasn't home by 10:30 a.m, I tried her mobile. It went straight to voicemail. I thought, you'll be in trouble when you get home. A while later, I tried again. Again, there was no reply. My mum tried too. She got the same response. We rang and rang all day. Then at 7 p.m, someone picked up. There were voices in the background, but no one spoke. I shouted, "Ashleigh, Ashleigh!" Still, no one responded. So I rang again. This time a man answered, and I said, "Who the hell are you?" Then he asked who I was. I replied, "I want to know who has my daughter's phone." It was then he said he was a police chief inspector. He told me a man had been arrested for driving offences. The police had stopped him for driving illegally, and he had Ashleigh's phone. The policeman said he'd call me back. I felt sick, panic, confusion. If Ashleigh had lost her phone, why hadn't she contacted me? I put out an appeal on Facebook. Ring me immediately if you know where Ashleigh is. Her friend Kirsty phoned. She told me Ashleigh hadn't stayed with her and that she hadn't seen her since college broke up on Friday. We always knew where Ashleigh was. She was reliable. She wasn't allowed to go to clubs. Actually, she didn't want to. She preferred to be at home. On Saturdays, the house was always full of screeching girls eating pizza and watching the X Factor. It was just out of character for her to lie. When she asked if she could go to Kirsty's, I agreed. Andrea felt a surge of anxiety. She didn't know what to do. All she knew was that the police had her daughter's phone, which had been in the possession of someone else. The thoughts that must have flashed through the distraught mother's mind as she waited for news. Why had Ashleigh lied? Why did someone else have her phone? And where was her daughter? The fear that her child was hurt somewhere were conflicted by Andrea trying to convince herself that Ashleigh was probably at a friend's house and would come home with a tale about how she'd lost her phone. Trying to focus her mind, Andrea concentrated on her younger children. Bathing them, she then read them a story as they dozed off to sleep, blissfully unaware of their mother's inner turmoil, which was about to be unleashed by a knock at the front door. Andrea recollected, quote, "The police came round at 11:30 p.m. It was 2 women officers, and I knew immediately what they were going to say, because they told me to sit down. That's what they say on TV dramas when it's bad news. I put my head between 2 pillows and said, I don't want to know, I don't want to listen. Please don't say it, please don't tell me. Then they said, I'm sorry to have to tell you we found a body. I said, is it Ashleigh? They said they didn't know. The body had to be identified. But of course, they did know. The man who had Ashleigh's phone was called Peter Chapman, and on the night of the 26th, he had been pulled over by police when his car was flagged on the automatic number plate recognition system, which showed the car had no tax or insurance. He was taken to the police station, where he was kept in the cells for a short while, before he was brought back to the desk sergeant, where he made a startling admission, which was captured on the CCTV. Quote, I killed somebody last night. I need to tell somebody from CID where the body is. His confession stunned the officers present, who had no inclination that the man who had just been in the back of their car, whom they had arrested for a traffic violation, was responsible for any murder. Accompanied by officers, Chapman directed them to the place where he claimed to have left the body. It wasn't far from where he had been stopped for the traffic offence. He told them to stop the car by a service station, which consisted of a petrol station and a roadside cafe, positioned just off a roundabout. Behind this lay farmland, and having exited the car, Chapman directed the officers towards the field, identifying the ditch that ran about the perimeter. In single file, the officers were guided by the suspect towards the ditch, where he pointed at a lifeless body. Unbeknownst to the officers at the time, they were looking at the fully clothed remains of Ashleigh Hall. They would only learn this when her frantic mother rang her phone, and the desk sergeant answered, but they still required someone to formally identify the 17-year-old. The task of identifying the remains fell to Ashleigh's grandfather. Andrea recalled, quote, It was my dad who went to identify Ashleigh on the Tuesday night. I couldn't bear to see her dead, and at that point I felt my life had ended. The physical pain was like a weight in my chest. Text messages on the teenager's phone helped to reveal what had happened after Ashleigh had left her home at roughly 7 p.m. that Sunday night. It became apparent that despite telling her mother she planned to stay at her friend Kirsty's house, Ashleigh had actually agreed to meet up with the 17-year-old boy she had been talking to on Facebook. Her texts revealed that the teenage boy, Peter Cartwright, had arranged for his father to collect Ashleigh from her home. The conversation went as follows, quote, Hi hon, it's Pete's dad. Are you sure you don't mind me picking you up? Pete is really looking forward to seeing you. And yes, it's okay if you stay. Within seconds, Ashleigh responded, No, it's fine, I don't mind. I trust him, so I trust you. And thank you. Cartwright then messaged Ashleigh, quote, My dad's on his way, babe. He says excuse the state of him, LOL. He doesn't have to come in and meet your mum, does he, LOL? He'll be a mess, probably, LOL. Oh, and are you wearing some sexy underwear? Ashleigh replied, quote, Okay, babe, and no, he doesn't, laugh out loud. And it's okay. What car has he got? And you'll have to wait and see, won't you? When the blue Mondeo pulled up outside Ashleigh's house, she replied to Cartwright to let him know his dad had arrived. She happily got into the passenger seat. The driver, a bald-headed man with a slender face, elongated chin, and black-framed glasses, smiled warmly at her as he welcomed the teenager into the car. Releasing the handbrake, the car pulled away from the curb, the red tail lights flashing in the windows that they passed, before reaching the end of the junction and disappearing. No one will ever know what thoughts went through Ashleigh's mind as the vehicle got further away from her home. Did she begin to feel uncomfortable? Was there a point she realised something was wrong? Ashleigh had no way of knowing that the man in the driver's seat was not Peter Cartwright's dad, nor could she have known that the boy she believed she was meeting didn't exist. By getting into the car, she had inadvertently put herself in the clutches of Peter Chapman, who, unbeknownst to Ashleigh, was a serial sex offender. Born in January 1977, Peter Chapman was raised by his grandparents on the Hardwick estate in Stockton. Constructed in the 1960s, the estate was a sprawling grey urban housing complex, home to a close-knit community. Like many estates, it's had its fair share of crime and antisocial behaviour, especially in the late 90s and early 2000s, when the houses had fallen into disrepair, crime rates had soared, and unemployment was high, leading to the area being regenerated, with much of the estate that Chapman had grown up in having been demolished. Not much is known about his early years, but by 1993, at the age of 15, he had his first interaction with the law, when he was accused of sexual assault. This accusation, however, did not make it to court, and the case was dismissed. When he was 19, Chapman had formed a friendship with a girl, whom he went on to rape. It is claimed that the girl reported the attack, but all charges were dropped when the victim became pregnant. In the same year, he kidnapped a 17-year-old girl, tied her up, sexually assaulted her, and then at knife point, he stole her money. He repeated this act just 2 days later on a 24-year-old woman, who was a sex worker. When he picked her up in his car, he proceeded to take the terrified woman 24 miles away from where he'd met her. Holding her at knife point, he subjected her to the same attack as the 17-year-old sex worker just a couple of days earlier. During the attack, he had arrogantly told the 24-year-old what he had done to his previous victim, in a belief that the woman would stay quiet, but she didn't, and reported the attacks to the police. This time he stood trial on 2 counts of rape and kidnapping. The trial judge called Chapman, quote, a danger to women, and he was ordered to serve 7 years at a young offenders institution, with a caveat that upon his release, he would be placed on the sex offenders register. Just 4 years later, Chapman was released. He was placed on the sex offenders register, which he would be on indefinitely, due to the length of his sentence and the serious nature of his offences. With this, he had to abide to numerous restrictions and rules. The conditions of his release on licence were as follows. He had to display good behaviour and would be recalled to prison should he commit any criminal offence. He had to maintain communication with his appointed probation officer. He had to remain at an address that had been pre-approved and to notify officers of any changes to this address. He had to seek employment at a workplace that had been approved by the probation officer and presented a low risk to the licensee re-offending. The licensee was not permitted to travel outside of the probation officer's area of authority without prior approval. Chapman was also given numerous restrictions. These included restrictions on using the internet, mobile phones and cameras. He had to report to a police station to give details of any vehicle he had access to. He also had to provide police with information of all previous addresses, including those of family and acquaintances, as well as keeping them informed of any change of address. This stipulation included identifying whether the address was occupied by a child. For the first 6 months of his licence, Chapman resided in a hostel in Middlesbrough, before he was relocated to a hostel in Liverpool. It was here that a risk assessment was carried out, the report from which stated that he was a dangerous offender who posed a high risk. Later that year, he was interviewed by police in Bristol on deception offences, but no charges were brought against him. Just a year after leaving prison, Chapman had moved into a home in Merseyside, which he shared with his new girlfriend and her child. But when she learned that he was a registered sex offender, she ended the relationship and ordered him to leave the property. It is believed by some that this triggered his rage against women, causing him to offend again, as shortly after the breakup of this relationship, he was arrested for a rape of a sex worker in Cheshire. However, this case was dismissed and all charges were dropped. In a recurring pattern in 2003, he abducted and raped a teenage girl at knife point. He held her hostage for 14 hours. This incident was investigated. It went to trial, but Chapman was once again released without charge when the case was discontinued. In August of 2003, Chapman failed to comply with his licence when he did not register his current address after being released from custody for the rape offence. He was returned to prison to serve an 8-month sentence, and upon reassessment, he was still regarded as a high-risk offender. Almost as soon as he was out of prison, he was in trouble again. This time in July 2004, he once again failed to register a current address, and against the requirements of his order, he did not notify his probation officer of his whereabouts. During this time, he travelled the country and failed to keep in contact with his assigned officer. For this, Chapman was ordered to serve 15 months behind bars. Released in 2005, Chapman this time complied with the terms of his licence. He notified his supervising officer of his current address and seemed to be keeping out of trouble. But in August 2006, Chapman realised that he wasn't being monitored as closely as he had been. It was later revealed that the probation service didn't have enough officers for the number of cases they needed to monitor, which meant that some people slipped through the cracks. This included Peter Chapman, who took this opportunity to sign up for a 20-week computer course, despite the fact that use of a computer was in violation of his licence. Chapman remained in Liverpool, where in October of 2008 he was involved in a hit-and-run incident in which a woman suffered a broken arm. He fled to Darlington in the northeast, where he started a new relationship. Meanwhile, Merseyside police issued a warrant for Chapman's arrest in relation to the hit-and-run. His new relationship soon ended, and Chapman now found himself not only wanted for the hit-and-run, but he was also the suspect in an arson attack on his neighbour's property and was wanted for breach of his licence agreement. By January 2009, the officer who had been assigned to monitor Chapman had been retasked to work on a murder investigation in Liverpool. This allowed the sex offender to disappear off the radar, and his wanted status would only be circulated on the National Police Database in October 2009, just 3 days before he crossed paths with Ashleigh Hall. During this time, Chapman had found himself homeless. He was primarily living in his car. He had stolen a laptop on which he set up profiles on social media and various dating sites. Hiding behind concocted profiles, he was able to disguise his identity behind the image of a shirtless teenage boy. Chapman presented himself as a typical 17-year-old boy. He had hundreds of friends on his Facebook profile. The majority of them were teenage girls. Police found that Chapman had begun his interaction with Ashleigh just 6 days prior to the murder. However, her mother pointed out that, quote, he groomed her. He told her she was lovely, funny, and pretty. Ashleigh was a typical teenager. Despite her large circle of friends and seemingly confident demeanour, she still had insecurities like every 17-year-old, and she had never been in a relationship. So it is not hard to imagine that she would be wooed by the attractive 17-year-old boy who knew all the right things to say to make her feel comfortable and ultimately trust him. When she agreed to meet him, Ashleigh had told her mother that she was going to stay at her friend Kirsty's house and that Kirsty's dad would be collecting her. Andrea had no reason to doubt that this was true, as Ashleigh had always been honest. So why did she lie to her mum? Embarrassment? Fear of judgment? Perhaps she was worried her mum would tell her she couldn't go. Tragically, only Ashleigh has the answer to this question. But we have to remember she was young, naive and trusting. She probably never considered that she was putting herself in danger, as she was swept up in the excitement of the situation. And if we're all completely honest with ourselves, we have probably put ourselves in situations which, looking back, we would regret. I say this because during researching this case, I noticed a lot of comments that blamed Ashleigh for not being more careful, or blamed her mum for not being aware of who her daughter was interacting with online. On behalf of Ashleigh's family, I find these comments very hurtful. Many questions were raised regarding the failings that allowed Peter Chapman to contact Ashleigh in the first place. Why wasn't this man, who had been described as a highly dangerous offender, more closely monitored? How had Chapman managed to violate several terms of his licence without being reprimanded? And where was the online safeguards that should have prevented a convicted sex offender contacting potential victims? It was discovered that Ashleigh was not the only teenage girl that the 33-year-old had contacted under the guise of the non-existent Peter Cartwright. After he had acquired the stolen laptop in September, he had contacted 1,000 potential victims, showering them with compliments and attention, using his manipulative nature to convince them to trust him. Ashleigh was not the first girl he had attempted to meet up with either. It was discovered that Chapman had arranged to meet another girl, and like Ashleigh, she had agreed. However, when the teenager had approached Chapman's car, she grew suspicious that the driver was not the attractive 17-year-old she had thought she had come to meet. Instead, she came face to face with the slender, bald-headed figure of Peter Chapman. This girl's suspicions made her run away, and ultimately saved her from his clutches. But Ashleigh wasn't so fortunate. Chapman learned from this failed attempt, and realised he would have to come up with a reason why the girl was being met by a scruffy-looking 33-year-old man. Hence the ruse he used on Ashleigh, in which he took on the personas of both 17-year-old Peter Cartwright and his father. Serious questions were asked regarding the systematic failings that had allowed Peter Chapman to go unmonitored for 9 months, breaching the terms of his licence. The case was voluntarily referred to the Independent Police Complaint Commission, who conducted 2 separate investigations, one into Merseyside Police and their probation service. It was noted that the last time Merseyside Police had attempted to contact Chapman was in January 2009. They issued a warrant for his arrest. However, this only alerted officers within the Merseyside area, which proved worthless, as Chapman had already relocated to the northeast. It was not until the 23rd of October that Chapman's details were entered onto the police national computer, advising that he was wanted for arson, breach of the sex offenders register, and theft. The information provided a description of the wanted man and details of the dark blue Ford Mondeo he was known to have access to. The warrant was given a medium priority status. The IPCC found numerous failings in the manner in which Chapman was monitored, with the report concluding that the lack of resources and training contributed to the lack of monitoring. IPCC Commissioner Nazim Malik released a statement regarding the investigation, quote, "It is evident from our investigation that this particular sex offender unit was inadequately resourced, and as a result, the officer tasked with managing sex offenders in the community had an impossible task. Chapman was not monitored effectively and managed to slip away with terrible consequences. I fully appreciate that irrespective of the failings in monitoring, Chapman may well have enacted his plan anyway. Only 24-hour-a-day monitoring could ensure prevention of such acts. My deepest sympathies go out to Ashleigh Hall's family for their loss. Their grief can only be compounded by the evident police failings that have been uncovered surrounding the man who murdered Ashleigh." End quote. Andrea Hall responded to the conclusion of the inquiry and her perceived lack of response from Merseyside Police, quote, "Obviously, when I started reading the report, it was just like reliving it all over again, and I didn't really realise how serious it was. It's really bad, I think. It's worse than I could ever imagine. I probably cried all morning. It wouldn't make things better and it wouldn't make things right, but an apology would be nice. Just even to say, look, sorry, we do know this could have happened or shouldn't have happened. Just even that one word, just sorry." With Chapman's details now entered on the national database, it meant that any movements made by his vehicle would trigger a hit on the automatic number plate recognition cameras. These operate by capturing an image of the number plate, which is then converted into a compatible file that can be cross-referenced with the police database. Since the 23rd of October 2009, when the report was posted, Chapman's car was captured 16 times in areas monitored by 3 separate police forces: Cleveland, Durham, and North Yorkshire. The IPCC investigated how the ANPR systems had been used by the forces, and found there were inconsistencies between each force in terms of how and when the system was accessed. In the Cleveland area, the system was monitored 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, by a specialist ANPR team or supervisors based in the main control centre. On the 23rd of October, the day the wanted report was first released nationally, Cleveland police received 2 hits on their ANPR system relating to Chapman's car. The first was logged at 9:30 that evening, and the next was less than 15 minutes later. As the system was constantly monitored, the hits were flagged at the control room. However, due to insufficient officers in the area, no action was taken. The following day, Cleveland police once again received more alerts. This time, 3 hits were recorded between 6:42 p.m. and 7:42 p.m. This time, units were dispatched to track down Chapman, but they were unable to locate the car. This happened again the next morning, between 10:30 and midday. Officers responded, but failed to spot the dark blue Ford Mondeo. On the 25th of October, the day Chapman had arranged to meet up with Ashleigh, his car triggered the ANPR system in the Durham area, just 40 minutes after Chapman had collected Ashleigh from her home. The Ford Mondeo was flagged by the system. It would be triggered again at 8:25 p.m. The Durham force utilised the staff at the control room to monitor the ANPR system. But on that night, no one was alerted to the hit at 10 to 8, because the assigned staff members were unable to log onto the system. It's awful to think that at this time, Chapman may have already begun his attack on Ashleigh. However, given the isolated area he carried out the crime, it is possible that had any units been dispatched, they probably wouldn't have encountered the vehicle. The hit that was recorded at 8:25 that night did not alert the control room. This was due to the manner in which the system in the Durham area had been set up, in which vehicles heading out of their jurisdiction were not flagged. The IPCC investigation also learned that Durham's ANPR system was unreliable, with issues ranging from staff being unable to access it, to the system shutting down completely. Of the 14,413 hits that North Yorkshire Police received between the 23rd and the 26th of October, just 2 were from Chapman's vehicle. However, these went undetected, because unlike other forces, North Yorkshire Police did not constantly monitor the ANPR system, and often they only used it for specific operations. 16 times, Chapman's car was captured by the static ANPR cameras. 12 of these were in the Cleveland area, and it was this force who would ultimately apprehend Chapman after his car had been flagged at 7:05 on the afternoon of the 26th of October. That was 3 days after his wanted status went national, and almost 24 hours after he had murdered Ashleigh. The investigation also found that the quality of the information put into the police national computer varied immensely, with the system sometimes being used for minor issues. This in turn led to the possibility of an overload of information on the ANPR monitoring systems, which subsequently led to high and medium priority matters being missed. At the conclusion of the inquiry, IPCC Commissioner Nicholas Long stated, quote, "This investigation has highlighted serious flaws in the operation of the ANPR system. It is clear that it can be a very valuable asset, but it is dependent on the system being managed and monitored well and containing accurate information. There needs to be a full review about how the ANPR system is operated, including the development of consistent policies for the monitoring of the system across all forces, the prioritization of information, and the accurate input of data." There are many what-ifs thrown up from our investigation. It is impossible to say with certainty that better use of the ANPR system could have prevented Ashleigh Hall's murder, but it is clear there were opportunities missed here. It took 16 hits on the ANPR system before Chapman was finally arrested. Tragically, in that time, he was able to enact his terrible plan to murder Ashleigh. My sympathies go out to her family again for their loss. I cannot begin to comprehend how terrible this loss has been for them. What I hope they can see from this report is that the issue here is about systematic failures and not individual misconduct. The ANPR system is championed as a wonderful tool for police forces. However, it has undoubtedly become a victim of its own success, in that the amount of information contained in the system and the hits generated has made it virtually impossible to monitor adequately given police resources. A full review is required to ensure the system is fit for purpose." End quote. When Chapman told the desk sergeant that he had committed a murder, his diminutive frame and mild-mannered demeanour jarred with the horrific ordeal he inflicted on Ashleigh. He even claimed that he had accidentally killed her, but the evidence and his subsequent confession contradicted this. He admitted that at approximately 7:10 he collected Ashleigh from outside her home, having used 2 mobile phones to trick her into believing she was conversing with the non-existent father and son. Once Ashleigh had gotten into the car, they drove for about 12 miles before stopping in a desolate lay-by in an area known as Four Arches. Now he was alone with the 17-year-old girl. He forced her to perform oral sex on him, before making her remove her clothing from the waist down. He then bound her arms and legs with duct tape and raped her. Evidence in the car showed that he removed the tape, from which strands of Ashleigh's hair were recovered, along with a used condom which had contributions from both Chapman and Ashleigh on it. Chapman advised that he then let the terrified girl get dressed. It is awful to think of the false hope this may have given her, which was quickly dashed when Chapman once again secured her arms and legs with duct tape, but this time he wrapped it about her face, covering her mouth and nose, preventing the teenager from breathing, and she passed away from suffocation. He then drove Ashleigh's body to the field nearby, where he abandoned her. Chapman then claimed he drove around in his car for hours. All the time Ashleigh's overnight bag remained in the car, and was still there when he was arrested the following day. It was only after his incarceration that he gave any explanation as to why he killed Ashleigh, claiming that she reminded him of the ex who had kicked him out after she had learned he was a sex offender. He wrote in a letter to a friend, quote, "That night I lost the plot completely, 'cause Ash looked too much like someone who really messed my head up, and was saying the same sort of things, and I just lost it 'cause she wouldn't shut up. That's why I put the tape over her mouth, just to shut her up. I honestly didn't mean it to happen like it did. But I can't change what's happened. I really wish I could." Chapman's trial started at Teesside Crown Court in March 2010, at which he entered a guilty plea. Andrea sat through the proceedings, hearing everything that her daughter had gone through that terrible night. She recalled, quote, "I listened to the graphic details in court, and my face ached from crying." She recalls, "The worst part was sitting in the same room as Chapman and not being able to say or do anything. But I needed to look. I stared. My head was banging and I tried to hold back the tears, but I had to see it right through to the end." Sentencing Chapman to a minimum term of 35 years, Judge Peter Fox QC stated that, quote, "This was an evil scheme, very carefully brought, and with considerable details to trap your victim. For what it is worth, I cannot foresee your release." Andrea Hall stood outside the court following the verdict and addressed the press, stating, quote, "Them sort of people shouldn't be allowed out into society anyway. I blame them, the authorities, for letting them out. He should not have been let out whatsoever, and for the people that are supposed to keep an eye on them, they should keep an eye on these sort of people. She followed with a stark warning for other parents. Just put the message out that please, parents whose kids are on Facebook, please ask them to tell you who they're talking to. You just don't know who is behind that photo. The lead investigator on Ashleigh's case, Chief Superintendent Andy Reddick, reinforced Andrea's message, quote, "Young people who go online can easily fall prey to the devious tricks of predatory paedophiles who, sadly, are all too willing to prey on the naive and vulnerable." Facebook also released a statement, which effectively stated, "It is the responsibility of its users to ensure that they utilise the site's safety and privacy features, and they should refrain from meeting people they do not know online," adding that, quote, "There are unscrupulous people in the world with malevolent agendas." Andrea has to live with the loss of her daughter every day. She has since reflected on Ashleigh's death and the indescribable pain she suffers, quote, "Chapman said he was remorseful, but his face was impassive when he was sentenced. My dad says he should be castrated. I say he took Ashleigh's life, so his life should be taken too. People say Ashleigh made a mistake, but she didn't. She was groomed and conned by an evil man. Our barrister said afterwards, he got the longest sentence. It is life, indefinite. He'll never get out. And I said, but he still has his life. I had to see the ditch where he left Ashleigh's body. It was awful, dark and forbidding. My body froze, I couldn't walk. I felt as though my legs were buckling under me. I just hoped she was dead before he dumped her there. I imagined her screaming. She would have been so scared. For all she was nearly grown up, she was still my baby. I put some flowers there, made a little shrine. But it is at home that I feel her presence. I see her dancing and full of joys, her makeup perfect, her brown eyes shining." End quote. So have we learned lessons from Ashleigh's death? Sadly, a report released by the National Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children, or the NSPCC, says we still have a lot to learn. The report revealed that there were 4,373 offences recorded in 2019 in England and Wales. These complaints included children being contacted by adults, the receipt of illicit content, and children being groomed. Shockingly, it found that 1 in 5 children who were victims were aged between 4 and 10. Peter Wanless, NSPCC Chief Executive, called on the government to take action to protect the young and vulnerable, saying, "It's now clearer than ever that the government has no time to lose in getting tough on these tech firms, despite the huge amount of pressure that social networks have come under to put basic protections in place. Children are being groomed and abused on their platforms every day. These figures are yet more evidence that social networks simply won't act unless they are forced to by law. The government needs to stand firm and bring in regulation without delay." End quote. Ashleigh's death serves as a stark reminder of the threat of online predators, a threat that pupils at her former college want to make other young people aware of, and because of this desire they created Ashleigh's rules, which are as follows. Number 1. If you ever meet up with somebody who is alien to you and your friends, make sure that you meet them in a group of at least 2 to 3 people, and in a public, well-lit and populated area. Number 2. Inform somebody of where you are going and what time you should be back. Also the name of the person you are meeting. Number 3. Don't accept anyone on social networking sites that you do not know. Number 4. Remember never to trust anyone who you have met online. You don't know what they are capable of doing. Number 5. Never tell a stranger on network sites or chat rooms anything personal about yourself, for example, where you live or your date of birth. Number 6. Never meet anyone you don't know. Thank you for joining me for episode 44 of It's Murder Up North. Episode 45 will be available next week. So in the meantime, keep an eye on those shadows.